Okay, hi. It's 22nd of January today, and I'm continuing to do indoor things since I don't really have a good garage space. I've been doing a bunch of small items like cutting out hardboard templates for the interior trim pieces, disassembling the doors, taking all the hardware out of them and trying to de-rust the inside of the doors without actually taking the skins off. And I thought today, while I've got some rust converter sitting on one of the door skins, that I might start taking a look at the dash and all of the gauges and controls and stuff. So, I think I've mentioned before that I actually had two different cars to work from. So, here on the right-hand side is the dash from the actual 1969 Mark II GT6. And you can see it's got the newer slide type heater controls. It's got these rocker switches for lights and other. And sorry for the noise in the background, that's the furnace just coming on. And the other thing that I just noticed when taking all of this stuff out is that the bezels on all of these gauges are actually the black. Now, I seem to remember someplace somebody mentioning that if you take the paint off, they're chrome or silver-colored metal underneath. But anyway, I'll worry about that later. The other side of the table on the left here has got the dash from my old defunct 1968 Mark I, and I like the switches on this a lot better. So here, for example, in this bag, you can see these older style toggle switches. Like this. I like the look of those kinds of switches better. I don't know why, it's just a personal thing. So I'm going to try as much as possible to recreate the dash in the style of the Mark I and using as many of the Mark I pieces as possible. So as you can see, I've got both of these dashes most complete. The only thing that's missing on the Mark I is over here right on the driver's side, this little chromed trim piece that would go here is missing, and I was looking at old photos that I've got of the dash, and it appears that that probably has always been missing since I had the car. So that's a bit disappointing because I knew very much that I could get a replacement for that. And here on the Mark II, obviously the finish is in much better condition, but I still wouldn't be using this. I have a piece of wood that I'm going to use. I'm just going to pause for a second and I'll come back with that. Okay, so this piece of wood that you see here is what I've chosen to do the dash in. Now, most people, I believe, will take a piece of plywood and veneer the front of it. There's a lot to be said for that particular technique because the plywood offers a great deal of dimensional stability, and it, especially if you're looking at a car that may be exposed to elements a lot on a convertible like a Spitfire, it would be definitely the way to go. However, because the GT6 is a hardtop and there should be less weather to worry about, I am going to actually do this in a solid piece of wood. Now, one of the first questions people will ask is, well, what kind of wood is that? And I must confess that I have absolutely no idea. Many years ago, my wife's grandfather passed away and left one of his legacies was a huge stockpile of all sorts of exotic woods. He was a carpenter and cabinet maker. He worked for the Ontario Northland Railroad doing that sort of thing for about 45 years and did it in his spare time up until shortly before he passed away. At the time of his death, he was practically blind, but was still doing wood turning, mostly by touch. The man was quite a craftsman. He made lots of beautiful pieces of furniture. But what I have here is some of the wood that was left behind. I've planed this down to the thickness of the existing panel, and when I do finish this, I will be finishing both front and back. That will give a little bit better dimensional stability to this, hopefully prevent any kind of warping or cracking. So with that kind of treatment, this should be long lasting, and you won't get the kind of delamination effects that you get with plywood. So this sort of thing. Again, this was exposed to the elements rather drastically for a long time. Not what I expect to happen in the new car, but or in the resurrected car, but still. Okay, I've babbled on a lot. Enough for that. So what I'm going to start doing now is start taking the instruments from the Mark I panel apart and see how well I can separate them into the appropriate components and get them cleaned up. Obviously, some of these pots are going to need some drastic treatment, rust removal and repainting and stuff. There's lots of great resources online on all the usual suspects of websites and forums, etc. So I'll be using a lot of those as my reference points and taking pictures as I go. Okay, thanks very much, and we'll see you soon. Okay, hooray, I got the first bezel off. So what I had to do was bring in the other one so you can see a little bit better. The old sealant, whatever it was, because it was more than just a rubber ring that was all around the edge here. I had to scrape all of that away with a fine screwdriver, and even then I couldn't twist the bezel. So what I ended up having to do was to go around very, very carefully and just ever so slightly lift up those little tabs all the way around, but just a fraction, being careful because of course I didn't want to break it. Once I did that, then it was loose enough to take off. So now to continue. Okay, well, progress so far. I started on this dial, which is the tack from the Mark I. Ended up being able to get the bezel off. It was not easy, but it came off eventually. And then I had my first whoops, which was that the glass in the tack is really stuck in place. So I was trying to pry it gently with fingernails at first, but that didn't work, and then I tried a little tiny screwdriver, tried a little utility blade, and what ended up happening is I ended up cracking the glass. So not the end of the world, because you can get replacements for those, but still. So I called a halt at that point for that one, pulled the tack from the Mark II, and that one actually came apart not too badly. Again, the bezel was a little bit tight. I found out why the glass was so hard to get out on the other one. There's actually a carrier, so once you pull it out, you can actually see there's actually another carrier ring that fits inside there. and then the glass is inside that. And this one, in the Mark 1 tack, it's really, really rusted. I went back and tried a little bit more gently after I'd gotten the Mark 2 apart, but still no luck. So really, I don't need that at the moment. I'm going to probably put the Mark 2 tack in with the chrome bezel. The Mark II because it's got the indicator and the demist light. So there's that. The mechanism looks to be in pretty good shape. Maybe clean up the back of it a little bit. A bit dusty. The front is in good shape, so I'll read up on how you can clean that off. I read somewhere how you can clean that up and make it look nicer. No touch-ups other than that required. And this is the body. Again, not too bad. A little bit of rust on the surface. Not too bad on the inside. So clean this up and put it back together. And that'll be one instrument down. All right, just kind of trucking along on getting these gauges disassembled. And I just happened to notice something that might be worth mentioning. So this little piece of the dash is from the Mark II. This is the Mark II speedometer. I noticed as I was working on these that in the Mark II dash, all of the rims of the bezels are inset so that they're flush with the front of the dash, as you can see there. But if I take this, bring it over here to a piece of dash I have from the Mark 1, you can see that same instrument now sits proud on the dash. So I'm going to have to decide when I'm making the cutouts for these whether I want them recessed like this or proud like that. All right. Hello, it's David. I'm back. This is the second day that I've been working on the gauges for my GT6. I gotta say that I'm kind of blown away with what I've been able to get done here. I'm gonna try and get in a little bit closer. I don't know how good that comes out on the camera, a little unfocused, but you can see this is one of the speedometer tachometer bezels, and you can see the kind of condition that that's in, rusty and grotty looking. And this is one of the other ones after, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes of cleaning it up. It doesn't look brand new, but it certainly looks like well-restored 50-year-old chrome-plated trim. I'm pleasantly surprised, and all that was about 10 or 15 minutes of a little bit of cleaning action with some Mother's chrome polish. There we go, Mother's chrome polish, and a little bit of 3M Scotch-Brite pad. First I started by squirting a whole bunch on and then rubbing it down with a cloth rag, but found it easier to just use a little tiny piece of the Scotch-Brite pad, squirt a little daub on the pad, and then rub away. And as you can see, again, while it's not perfect, it is leaps and bounds better than the uncleaned one. So I'm going to continue on. I've got the two smaller gauges, the fuel and the temperature gauge to do, and then I have to get to thinking about how I'm going to do the layout on my dash. I've made a cardboard cutout of the original layout, So I'm going to be thinking about how I want to modify that, if I want to modify it. If I want to add any new gauges to it, I'll have to buy new gauges. I do have extra fuel and temperature gauges because I was working with 2 full sets of gauges from 2 different GT6s, but I don't know what other gauges I want to put on here, so I'll have to be thinking about that a little bit. So back to cleaning. Alright, here we go. So I'm just so pleased with how this worked. All of the chrome bezels have all polished up really, really well. Just amazingly bright. I even got a little bit crazy and cleaned the back edges where the gaskets go. And then I moved on to the switches. Like I said, I really like this style of switch. And you can see, hopefully there's good light there, you can see just how bright and shiny those are now. That is just so great. One of those little jobs that makes you go, oh wow, this is all worthwhile.